Okay, so let's just kind of get right into it. A donor advised fund is a tax deductible financial account. You put money into it, it's tax deductible when it hits the account, and at any time you can send that money to any public charity or public charity equivalent. And for any amount of time that it sits inside that account, it can be invested. And so most donor advised funds have the capability to invest. And very simply, the highest level, that's what a donor advised fund is, a tax deductible financial account for charitable giving. So principally, this is about simplification. And there's a couple of different streams of simplification and its power that I want to highlight for you all. Practical reasons why I think DAFs are powerful. Number one, and this is around giving now versus later, that it brings the element of commitment to giving into your life in a very practical way. And that forms a habit of giving in your life, which spiritually forms you. And so I think that's the piece that I really want to bring home today, and where I think DAFs are particularly magical. They also streamline a bunch of giving friction. I'll go more into that. And then tax efficiency. So we're able to run a couple plays on tax efficiency. Rob mentioned giving assets with Vanguard. That's a big one, and we'll touch on it. And if we have time, I'll talk about multi-year, but I might just blast through for the sake of time. So I want to start out with a quick video from Simon Sinek, one of my favorite leadership speakers, and this should boot up here.
Active kindness, active generosity is how simple it is to make people feel good. I was walking down the streets of New York City, and a guy walking in front of me, his backpack opened and a bunch of paper fell out on the street. And it didn't take much to bent down. I gathered the papers and pointed out that his back had opened. Now, in our bodies, there's a chemical called oxytocin. Oxytocin is responsible for all the warm fuzzies, unicorns, and rainbows. It's responsible for all the warm feelings of connectedness we have with each other, friendship, love. Huge amounts of oxytocin surge through a woman's body as she gives birth. This is what is responsible for the mother-child bond. Oxytocin binds human beings. There are many ways to get oxytocin. One of them is acts of kindness and acts of generosity. It feels good when we do something nice for someone. It feels good when someone does something nice for us. On this particular day, I did something for someone with no expectation of anything in return. I got a little surge of oxytocin. I felt good. He turned to me and he said, "Thank you. It feels nice when someone does something for us with no expectation of anything in return." He felt good. I walked to the end of the street. I'm waiting to cross the street. And a total stranger who happened to be standing next to me said, "I saw what you did back there. That was really cool." As it turns out, witnessing an act of generosity releases oxytocin, and he felt good. And the best part about oxytocin is the more oxytocin we have in our bodies, the more generous we become. It is Mother Nature's way of trying desperately to get us to look after each other. I can guarantee you that that man who witnessed what I did something nice for somebody that day simply because he saw someone do something nice for somebody that day. So what if we commit to do something nice for someone with no expectation of anything in return? Imagine what happens at work. Imagine what happens at home. Imagine what happens with our friends. But it must be genuine.
Okay, so Simon Sinek breaks out this idea of oxytocin in your brain is unlocked when you do something generous, and that increases the probability that you will want to do it again. So long story short, giving can be addictive with your brain chemistry, that we are wired to do more generosity when we see generosity happen. There are a bunch of studies that indicate that the more we are generous, the happier we are, and the more generous in the future we are likely to be. So my argument here is that participation in financial giving is a gateway drug for a more generous life in general. That the more we can get in participating and the more we can give earlier, the more likely we are to live a generous life going forward. And ultimately, I think as Christians, it should be something that we aspire to, and we want to be people who are generous. And of course, we care about impact. But but we'll talk more about kind of the optionality around impact and participation in giving in just a second. To highlight this with a personal story, this is a woman named Leslie. She was one of my clients when I was a philanthropic advisor. She had a moment in her life where she decided to carve off a significant portion of her assets into a donor advised fund. It was a moment, carving many assets aside. She wasn't going to be able to spend the money by the time she died. She, as a result of that, became engaged with a number of charities in the Middle East around the Syrian refugee crisis. This is around 2014, 2015, when the situation in Syria was particularly bad. She became so engaged with that conflict and seeing how she could deploy her resources most strategically around this problem, that it completely changed the character of her life. She became a different type of person and ultimately became one of the most generous people that I know as a result of this process of participating in the act of giving. It totally shifted her priorities. And as a result, she made the decision to take a lot more of her personal balance sheet throughout that journey, and as a result of that journey, and dedicate it toward giving. In a way, the process of giving became addictive for her in the best possible characterization of the term. Building on this, there is some research by a group called Ideas 42 that indicate that the brain benefits of giving can actually happen regardless of the cause. So they did this study where they presented a list of charities and invited people to choose a charity or keep the money. And then they could choose to donate it, or they could choose to donate regardless of charity, and then we're presented with a choice of charities. So it's an ordering of the question of whether or not to give to a specific charity or to give in general. And what they found is that the donation rates and how people felt with result to this question was actually higher if they presented the choice to donate regardless of charity first. And this is what happens with donor advised funds. The ability to choose and commit to donating in general unlocks the same brain chemistry that giving direct to a charity does. Looks like Valentina jumped back in the waiting room here. Okay, great. Somebody who's co-host brought her in. Great. Okay, so what we see here so far, recapping where we are, brain chemistry, giving can be addictive, participating in giving in general, and that can happen even if we don't choose a charity, in charity where our dollars are going to end up. So here's the first unlock with donor advised funds. It enables you to commit to the idea of giving and start getting the benefits of giving without having to make downstream decisions. So you can make a one-time or ongoing commitment of income or assets into your donor advised fund, participate in giving without having to make all the downstream decisions of like, should it be this charity or that charity? How can I maximize my impact, etc. And it's regardless of the amount. We can start to see these benefits if it's $100 or $100,000. So this is really number one. There's been further studies on this with pre-commitment, that even if we get people to commit to the idea of doing that, if we get them to tell other people they are going to do that, I'm going to commit in the future to give certain amounts of money, we see that the money that they eventually give also goes up. So this whole direction of pre-commitment and commitment and participation around giving leads to a more generous life in the future. So my big argument is a donor advised fund is a phenomenal tool to get people to participate and start receiving some of the benefits and the shaping power of giving without having to figure out all the downstream complexity of their whole giving journey, let's say. And ultimately, we all, I think, want to become people like Leslie who are incredibly generous. And I think a donor advised fund is a means to help us on that journey. myself included. So we're going to blast through the rest of this. Streamlining giving friction. Two things. I already mentioned the idea of like giving money and deciding later. It's shown in behavioral economics that when we have time to consider a complex decision, you can see on this chart here, we actually can enter a space to make better decisions once we have emotionally processed the complexity of the problem that we're staring down. And in giving, if we have more time to consider and understand the trade-offs and counterfactuals with the opportunities we have to make impact, we can make better impact decisions. Time is our ally, even with charitable giving. And through a DAF, you can get the tax benefits at the time that it is most advantageous, while receiving the decision benefits of waiting, if that indeed is the case. You can impact the quality of your decision by waiting. And then the last thing, very practical, all your giving can be in one place and it's on one tax receipt. Very simple. So streamlining the giving friction is the second reason. Okay, last one here. We're going to talk about tax efficiency. And in fact, I'm going to skip this slide and just go straight into it. You can give appreciated assets very simply, and there are massive, massive tax benefits of giving appreciated assets like stock, ETFs, crypto, etc. If you have stock or crypto and you're giving cash, you are missing out on opportunities to be more tax advantaged. And let me qualify that. If you have long-term appreciated, if you have positions that you've held for more than 1 year that have gone up in value, you should be giving those rather than giving cash. Reason is, you can send more to charity, ultimately, was what it comes down to. And here's a case study. So this is a case study of a situation where somebody bought a position of stock for $20,000 and the price is $50,000. And this compares whether selling it eventually and donating cash, or donating the stock position outright in the economics therein. So let's look at it real quick. So the first major thing is that if you donate a long-term appreciated position, you pay no capital gains tax. Whereas if you sell the position, you are going to pay capital gains tax on how much that position has gone up in value. And usually that's 15%. In this illustration here, it's 23.8%. There's some federal and state things going on here in this case study. So they have, at the end of this, $42,860 in their pocket after selling the position and paying the tax. Then they donate that and they get an income tax deduction for $42,860. Now let's compare that. If they donate the stock outright, they don't pay any capital gains tax, and they're able to donate $50,000 of liquid wealth to the charity. So the charity receives $50,000, and they're able to take an income tax deduction for $50,000. So their income tax deduction is higher, the charity receives more money, and they pay no capital gains tax. So it's really, really powerful. And it actually doesn't matter what income tax bracket you're in, you can still avoid capital gains tax. And charities can ultimately receive more if you donate assets versus cash. And it's even more powerful with income tax deductions if you itemize. So it's super, super powerful. I know that's a little bit complicated and heady for those that might not be familiar, but giving assets is super powerful. And donor advised funds allow you to do that in one place with one tax receipt and support theoretically an unlimited amount of charities with that asset donation. And you don't put any of that complexity on those charities. Charities don't usually have the ability to handle that complexity unless they're a super large, well-established charity. So that's appreciated assets. So bringing this to sort of a close here, the donor advised fund makes all of what we talked about super easy. You can commit to give, you can set up giving automatically, you can set aside money for the long term in a moment, you can give assets. You can allow it to be a tool to shape your generous life. And there are a bunch of donor advised fund providers out there. CharityVest is one. There's the National Philanthropic Trust, Fidelity Charitable, Vanguard Charitable, Rob mentioned. There's a bunch of them out there. And how do they compare? JD mentioned that it might be valuable to look at, hey, what are the fees look like and how does CharityVest differ, which I appreciate the invitation to do that. We endeavor to make ourselves the easiest to use and the lowest fee. That's what we think technology can do, is make it delightful. I felt like donor advised funds were too complicated when I was using them as a philanthropic advisor, and I felt like the fees were too high. And so CharityVest has made them simple, and we brought down the fees. So pardon the shilling here for a moment, but we have endeavored to make our like fully loaded fees about half of what Fidelity, Vanguard, or Schwab's are, and those three are the lowest fee donor advised fund offerings in the industry. And we can go into more detail if you're curious there. And this is a quick look at our interface. We've designed it to be easy to use. It basically has two buttons. The contribute to fund button is like money in, and that can be cash, stock, crypto. And then grant to charity. Send money to any charity whenever you're ready. And you can automate any aspect of money in or money out with CharityVest. We really designed it to be easy to use. Here is my call to action for you all, is to make some sort of personal pledge or budget, to use our earlier language, a pre-commitment for giving. And I think that could be an unlock to live a more generous life, to just say, hey, I want to give this amount. Giving What We Can is a great resource. I know you all are probably familiar with that group in the EA community. Love what they're doing. And I love that they're pushing people to make pledges, and it all helps. And a donor advised fund is a great way to take another step, which is like set money aside, even if you're not sure which charities it's going to ultimately benefit, and then make the commitment. So that's what I have prepared for you in terms of our formal process here. But we can do questions. We can kind of dive deeper. We can look at the product itself and look at asset donation flows, if that's helpful, kind of wherever we want to go from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. Before we jump into the group Q&A, I'd just like to ask some questions that I think would be helpful for people who are tuning in over the recording. Yeah, but thanks so much. It was a great intro so far. So the first question has to do with whether a donor advised fund makes sense for people who are giving even just a couple $1,000s or low thousands a year. Is there any point where you would say, it doesn't make sense for that person to set up a DAF? I mean, with the fees being as low as they are, is that like a flat rate, like 0.45%, at least right now, for any amount? Or
yeah, so here's what I would say is, and this is one of the things that CharityVest we really endeavor to change, is to make donor advised funds applicable to everyone. And I'm actually going to bring this back up really quick, just to illustrate. So on this slide here, the left-hand column of this chart here, we have a basic fund. And actually, this is the default. So if you create a CharityVest account with us, you're in a basic account. And we have no fees whatsoever. So like you can't invest the money. So we charge fees on the invested assets. But if you don't invest, if you don't think money is going to stick around in the fund for any length of time, use a basic account, and we charge literally nothing. 100% of every dime that you put into CharityVest will ultimately end up at a charity. So that's what I would advise. So if someone is kind of on the lower end of giving and is not sure, hey, stick my toe in the water, this donor advised fund thing, it's free. Try it out. And what I would say is, I think, to my first point in the presentation, is that I think there are behavioral advantages of a donor advised fund. So the practical tax advantages do make less sense for someone who is, on the lower end of giving amounts and also on the lower end of tax brackets. But nevertheless, if you think you'd like to be more generous than you are, and you're looking for tools to help you along that journey to make commitments and follow through on them, a donor advised fund is phenomenal. And what we hear all the time from folks, in fact, I got a testimonial video a couple weeks ago from one of our users on this topic that says that, like, once he and his wife made the decision to set money aside in CharityVest, it changed how they thought and reacted to giving. That when they were, propositioned by opportunities, they already had money set aside, and they thought much more thoughtfully about, okay, we have this much to give away that we've already decided to give away. need to give it away, or we need to think about the counterfactual of this particular charitable opportunity and like what would be better if we're not comfortable. And so it just created all like a bunch more intentional conversations around giving that they weren't having before. So I just thought that was kind of a neat little anecdote. So there's behavioral advantages is my core answer. There is if somebody's on the line of like, the charitable, the standard deduction is 12,000 ish for a single filer and 24,000 for married. If someone is getting close to that line, having a donor advised fund can also enable them the ability to take advantage of what's called bunching. And bunching just basically means that you can give multiple years of your giving into a single tax year. And a donor advised fund allows you to do that and take all the tax benefits in a single tax year without giving anything in the following years, but to smooth your giving to the charities that you support. So if you have ongoing commitments to charities, you can smooth it over time. So it's kind of another, streamlining tool that enables you to take advantage of boosting your deductions. And if anybody's curious, I can explain that more deeply and pull up a chart if you're curious and going deeper there. But I wanted to preview that. So there are
Yeah,
reasons
so
for smaller
just as like an
donors.
example, if you had a married couple, they're both earning say $50,000 a year each, so 100K combined. Their standard deductible is like 24,000. So they could deduct their, let's say they're giving 10%, right? Like that's below their standard deduction. They wouldn't get any tax benefits from reporting their giving since it's under the standard deduction. But they use a DAF, they could bunch that together and report it in future years and get like tax benefits they wouldn't otherwise realize. Is that like an example where that would work?
Yeah, exactly, JD. And this slide right here is illustrating what you're talking about. So on the left-hand side, you've got a couple that has, roughly 7,200 of, I think it was in this illustration, of like general deductions that they're taking, which is like, mortgage interest and state and local property taxes. And then they have $8,000 a year in giving. And so the blue is giving and the black is like the other deductions. You can see they're not clearing the standard deduction, but on the right-hand side, if they take 3 years worth of their giving and give 24,000 in one single tax year, they can clear the standard deduction by a lot. And then they give nothing the following 2 years and the total and they take the standard deduction. So the total deductions over that 3-year period is actually much higher in the right-hand side of the chart than the left-hand side. So it can be a powerful tool to boost your deductions and basically get a guaranteed, return on cash, essentially.
Yeah. Rob added a helpful tip that for those thinking about bunching deductions that total charitable deductions are capped at 50 to 60% of AGI in a given year. I've heard a similar stat. Does that sound right, Stephen?
Yeah, that's right. With a donor advised fund, it's 50. Yeah, with cash. In assets, it's 30.
Okay. And then one last question before we jump to broader group Q&A. It doesn't take long to open an account, right? For me, it worked in just a few minutes. I haven't funded it yet, but I'd love to get some automatic system going. That seems too good to be true. Is it really just a couple minutes?
Yeah, I felt like there was a lot of unnecessary fat and pain in the donor advised fund world, and we stripped out everything we possibly could. And it takes about 90 seconds minimally, a couple of minutes, like you mentioned, if you really want to be thoughtful and methodical. So yeah, it's super simple. I mean, it's basically just name, email address, accept our terms of service, and you've created a donor advised fund. And then we have a couple other steps. If you want to link your bank,